Welcome to Chief Everything Officer, a podcast for entrepreneurs who do it all. We are sponsored by Juntobot, an impact-oriented venture school and studio focused on designing and scaling startup ecosystems for the future.
Greetings. So today we are with Jonathan Hakakian, a longtime investor in the startup community, having started an angel fund called Soundboard Angels and recently a venture fund called Sounboard Venture Fund. I'm going to let him introduce himself in his own words. But today we're just going to be walking through what he does and what really jazzes him from an investment standpoint when talking to startups, and how he provides unique value within the ecosystem. So Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Devin. Jonathan Hakakian, Soundboard Venture Fund, as Devin mentioned. We launched our first fund about 10 years ago with the specific intention of figuring out how to support early stage entrepreneurs that are kind of in the out of the way areas. When we launched, we were in the metro NYC area, and New York was definitely a secondary tech ecosystem back then. About 5 years ago or so, it overtook Boston as the number 2 in the country and has solidly stayed there. So we've seen the transformation and been part of it throughout the journey of New York over the past 10 plus years. And so what we're doing is we're really being a collective of investors that are acting as a fund to collaborate and invest together into startups and early stage companies that, again, are not the traditional startup that you would think about.
So when you're looking at the problem, your collection of investors is looking, the wedge opportunity they're looking to leverage, what does that look like? What is that you're looking to leverage that you found in New York or in the places that you look for?
So there are two aspects to that. One is the hustle and the grit and the perspective that the entrepreneur is bringing to the table, which what we saw and what we continue to see in these ecosystems is that they know that because they're not based in one of the major startup tech hubs, namely Silicon Valley and the Bay Area, there isn't this constant spigot of venture capital available to them. They can't just keep going back for more and more funds. So when they start the company, they're going at it with this concept of, I got to make it work. I got to get customers on board so I can pay the bills. Because their perspective is that ultimately the customers have to pay the bills, not the investors. And by nature of just being in these different ecosystems, it creates entrepreneurs that have this mindset. So that's on one side. On the other side is the opportunity itself. And we're going after more tech-enabled companies. And it's great, the research-driven companies that are really changing the world, we're sitting just below that and investing in companies that they're adding one layer of efficiency or ease of life to either business or people in general. So we're not looking for the name brand startups necessarily that you're going to hear about or read about in TechCrunch or the front page of Wall Street Journal. We're sitting below that. I try to fly below the radar, and when we do that, we see that the entrepreneurs get great success, our investors get great returns, and we get to keep building more and more funds.
When you kind of locked into this wedge opportunity, what personally motivated you to do this? What gets you up in the morning? What gave you passion around solving for this type of wedge opportunity?
To be honest, Devin, it was totally by accident. My partner and I, Richard Maggot, have known each other since 2007. And then we started working together in 2010. Richard's background has been 20 plus years in leadership development and management consulting. And he's built a great professional practice around that. And when we came together, it was to figure out how to bring what Richard's been doing at the mature stage, but still very entrepreneurial led, or how to bring the support and advisory services he's been giving them down to the early stage level, which we saw had a need for it back 10, 11 years ago.
Okay.
And so we just started in the advisory consulting practice into startups. And what we realized, like, this is great. They love it. They need it, but that's not what they need. Number one, their number one pain point is financing. They need to get the funds together to get past concept.
Yeah.
And again, when we started 10 years ago, we launched our first fund in 2012 just to help set the framework. When we launched our first fund, it really came on the heels of understanding that this is the need in the market. The entrepreneurs coming to us for both consulting and advisory work, and because they knew that we started building a network of investors. And then investors were coming to us because we had built a pipeline of entrepreneurs. So it kind of was this just natural coalescence of things that just happened. We didn't set out there that, hey, this is our thesis. It came together, and we saw that there's something here. And over time, that's when we really saw, like, okay, this is why it's working. This is what we're now seeing in the market is there are these entrepreneurs starting up. They need funding. They need financing. That they're not going to be multi-billion-dollar IPOs, again, what we read about, but there's a great economy and a great opportunity for them to scale and grow. They need a little bit of capital, and they need some support and a push and an ear to just listen.
It's really fascinating. I love the fact that you all grew organically into this concept as opposed to coming in with a thesis and then just like throwing as much money at it as you could until you optimized the success.
The funny story is that when I was 17 or 18, my parents were, my mother was actually taking me for a walk, and she's like, all right, start thinking about your career. What do you want to do? And I was like, I don't know, but I know I want to work with a lot of new companies starting up. And she kind of like smacked me on the head. She's like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. True story, I swear.
Yeah. Well, hey.
But somehow it just came in.
Yeah. There's an old 80s movie, and this kid Say Anything, and this kid meets his girlfriend's family for the first time, and they're like, so what do you want to do from a career perspective? He's like, I don't know, I've been thinking about this. I don't want to buy anything sold or processed. I don't want to sell anything bought or processed, and I don't want to process anything bought or sold. So, and my dad works for the military. I don't want to work for that institution. So I've been thinking kickboxing, sport of the future. It's just like everybody's faces just drop and they're like, what? And it's just like, I feel like I've been that kid in every single like meet the parents situation ever. Like they're like, what are you talking about? I incubate startups. Like chickens? Like, no,
Yeah, it's definitely a tough industry to explain to the end mom.
Yeah. My wife has a joke. Is like, I know my husband's really smart. I don't know what he does, and it's too late for me to ask. But so let me ask you a question. What with all the founders that you've worked with, and what have you found that your founders want and need from you? You talked a little bit about the lending an ear and the funding, but is there something unique that you've discovered that you're just like, oh, this is what they need,
I mean, beyond capital, obviously, they need empathy, and they need a network, and with that comes, I don't want to say structured support, but it's guidance that comes from having been there and having felt the pain of fundraising, having felt the pain of operating on and worrying about payroll next week. Or, to me, it's always funny, like having those first conversations with a business starting up and being like, you need insurance. What do we need insurance for? We're not doing anything yet. Well, go talk to the insurance guys, go talk to your attorney. This is like the third thing you need. And just having done all the,
it seems like a wasted investment until somebody breaks their foot going down the staircase,
Yeah. So it's having this collaborative effort of 40 plus investors that when we invest in a company, all 40 are on board as advisors. And what we do is we match the company and the entrepreneur with whoever resonates with them most, who has the most experience, the best network for that company.
Yeah.
And they're all operators. All of our investors have been entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs working within a larger corporate, but still very entrepreneurial in their own right. So they've done that. They felt that burden of having an entire company, entire labor force, or an entire department rest on their shoulders.
Yeah.
So when they speak, it's from that mentorship and guidance perspective, not the dictatorial, you have to do what I say.
Yeah, I learned this in business school, and of course you have to use this framework because Clayton Christensen wrote it. And you're like, but how do you execute on that? I don't know, but it's innovation. And you're like, great, thanks. So where are these people? You talked about looking in unique places. Where are these people that you're finding? Are they specific ecosystems, or are they just kind of like all over the place? So where do you find them?
We're open to looking all over, specifically in the U.S., because we're just not large enough to support and sustain investments internationally.
Yeah.
But so locally to us is U.S. We've developed really strong alliances and partnerships in communities like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Chicago, the state of Ohio. And what we've seen is the natural growth, and why there's natural growth for entrepreneurship in these areas, and mainly the cities, is because there's a good university ecosystem. Mm-hmm. There's a reasonable amount of wealth, either immediately or in the surrounding area. Mm-hmm. And so what that does is, if you've got university students, you've got the talent that's staying there, because most of them end up being urban areas. And up until COVID, the millennials and the younger generation have been flocking more towards the urban areas. So there's talent. Mm-hmm. Innovation is going to happen, and then they're going to want support. So once you have that, then the incubators, accelerators, entrepreneurial networks start up, and then the angel groups start. But in these areas that we've been focused on, that's kind of where it stops. Okay. And then there's this big pause, and then you've got private equity.
Okay.
So yeah, that's kind of what we've seen as the common thread in these areas that we've been focusing on. Thankfully, there's been a great rise over the past couple of years with initiatives to go out to communities like Atlanta or DC. Even Pittsburgh has got some acclaim. And more people are spending time there. But for the major VCs, the ones that we hear as brand names, it's with all due respect to them, it's not worth their time and money to focus on these communities, because the deals aren't large enough. They don't have, and they have a very big appetite. Yeah, correct. And normally, when a company is of that size, they're going to get moved out to the West Coast anyway. So. We're trying to again go under the radar and invest in areas and things that others won't.
Cool. So when you're looking at these teams in Pittsburgh or in Ohio, what do they look like from a team or a company standpoint? Are they founder operators? Are they builders? Are they a fully fleshed out team of different disciplines? What do they look like? When you see a team and you're like, ooh, yes, I need to talk to them. What do they look like?
So it's usually more than one person by the time we start taking them seriously. It's no longer a solo founder. Mm-hmm. They've been able to bring on one or two or three others. Now, co-founders or key managers or key employees, it varies, but they've already identified, one, they can't do things alone. And so they need that level of high level support, not, just task people, but the strategic. Mm-hmm. And two, they've been able to convince people to join them on their vision. Mm-hmm. That is a strong positive sign, positive signal when an entrepreneur can bring on other people to get paid less than market because of their vision.
Yeah, that's the rub, right?
Yeah, and it's important, because if you can't sell people who are in your industry or who if you can't get the technicians or the employees or the co-founders to come on board, it's going to be very difficult to get investors. So we look at the cohesion of the team, the way they work together, and this comes through two different facets for us. One, it's multiple discussions. I never want to be known as the fastest check in the West. There are great investors that do that. I have a friend who he literally met an entrepreneur at a party, a cocktail event on Sunday night, wrote the term sheet on the back of a napkin, and the money was wired on Monday. He's awesome. He's doing great. I love him to death. That doesn't work for me. We take our time and our diligence because I believe that diligence is a two-way street. So I want to get to know the entrepreneur through multiple instances and multiple cycles or weeks, and they should get to know us as well. And so one way we assess the team is just through gut and instinct. The other is that through my partner's work over the past 20 years, he's compiled a series of assessment tools that when you look at them in a silo, it gives how that person is and what their personality profile is, what their work profile is, who they are. But he's developed a way to analyze them layered on top of one another. And when you do that, and you look at the whole team, we can have a really constructive conversation with the team and say, hey, you guys work really well in these areas, but this is the blind spot, or these are the challenges and hurdles and obstacles you're going to come up against. What's really impactful is the conversation itself.
Yeah.
Not to make sure they've checked all the boxes or they have everything correct. Like, no, that's impossible at the startup stage.
Yeah.
But it's whether they can internalize that conversation. Whether now they say, hey, that's good information, really interesting. We don't have the bandwidth to focus on it right now, but I'm going to park that in my head. And you know what? In 6 months, I think that's a real thing. We're going to come back and we're going to want support, or to have a really good discussion about it. But if they sit there and they're like, no, absolutely not. That's bogus. I don't believe in it. What does that tell you about the entrepreneur?
Yeah. So do you look at it from a they are not coaching perspective, or that they are not self-aware enough to understand where they are weak and strong, and what gaps in their organization they need to fill?
I really like how you phrased that question. It's not just about coachability, because I think coachability has been thrown around a lot in the entrepreneurial world over the past few years, and there's been a lot of debates and postings about coachability versus just get it done and head down, just do your work and you'll be great. And it's that self-awareness that you're really talking about, where they can be introspective, they can understand that their perspective is not always the only one, or is not always correct. And if they have the ability to take in multiple inputs, multiple perspectives, analyze it, and make the best decision for the company, irregardless of whose idea it is.
Yeah.
I'm the first to tell entrepreneurs, look, if you're asking for advice, I'm one data point.
Yeah.
You have to talk to others. Like, I don't always know best, and most of the time I'm probably wrong because I don't know your client base. I'm not your target. But the fact if they just have that engagement and the self-awareness to discuss, that's tremendous. Now, coachability, it is important. I just think the term is thrown around a lot because it's more about thinking through and then reacting to the market needs and to your employees and to other things. It's like, can you be flexible?
Yeah, I love that. I 100% agree. I can't tell you how many times I've heard somebody say they're not really coachable, and what they meant was they didn't listen to me. And I'm like, well, dude, you have a very strong point of view on something. It might not be the correct one. I always tell all of my startups, look, I'm absolutely right, but so are the next 5 other people who are going to completely contradict me. So, in their mind, they're not looking to like lie to you. They strongly believe what they believe. Your job is to
Right.
figure out what piece of each is the right one for your business. And it's like,
Exactly.
I just love that. That's really,
Exactly.
yeah, cool. I'm always looking for those questions or those data points that give more than one piece of information, like, by asking them, you can see how well they can parse information, how strategically they think about their business, and as well how able they are to take that constructive criticism, and can they take input from you in a way that's valuable for both of you. So cool.
Yes, and it's because in the early stage, that's most of the company is in the analysis and the thought process.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot on that they can back up. Maybe they have a beta, maybe they have some pilots, but all of that is based on the intuition and the belief in the entrepreneur and what he or she can do, which in our world ends up being, how do they think?
Mm-hmm.
How do they react?
I like that, because there's a term my old business partner used to use called, I'm sure he still uses it, but called value blindness, which I just loved it, because it's not that you, when you're looking at somebody or looking at a startup, you can't see, it's like being colorblind. You can't see the value there. And those type of questions and that type of probing into an organization really allows you to see beyond what you traditional stereotype of what a success might look like, because you can't get out of, they are thinking strategically about their business, but that does lead me to, maybe not a pivot, but a slight, one of the things I've found is that there's a strict return on investment. There's an impact conversation to be had, but there's a strict return on investment for diverse teams. I think McKinsey did a study in 2015 about the top 15% of performers teams had female executives, and the top 35% had diverse teams overall. And I'd love to get a sense of what the diversity on your founding teams looks like. Do you actively seek that out, or is that something through the nature of where you're looking or how you're looking that you come across? And how do you, so I have some more questions on that, but I'll let you answer that question first. So
it is true, and I do believe the statistics. The VC and angel ecosystem as a whole needs to do more work here, and we are trying to do that. One of the things that we've seen is that our process by nature either is more ready to invest in diverse teams or finds entrepreneurs that they resonate better with diversity. And the reason is because the way we do our diligence is that we bring 5 of our investors. So if we have a team, if we have 40 investors, we're bringing 5 of them onto the diligence team. They don't all have backgrounds in that industry or have a connection with the network or the client base. So they're coming in with different perspectives. And one of them is always the contrarian, the challenger on the team. So by nature of the construct of how we're going into diligence, it's going in with this, let's have really good conversation and deep dive discussions about the business and the industry and strategy overall. And if the entrepreneur resonates with that, then it's a yes for us.
Yeah.
And by the fact that that they're open to that and they resonate with that, they are more open to diversity because they're open to diverse perspectives. And that's really what we've seen is the driver for diversity in there, is that it allows more perspectives to come into the conversation, which builds a better company.
Okay. So question for you then, we all have our own lens that we see the world through. And how do you guys have an active process for challenging? I like the whole concept of the contrarian, in the
Mhm.
room, whose job it is to say, this is an awful idea. Let me sell you on why. And then you can, through that conversation, you can discover whether or not it is actually not a good idea or not. But when you're looking at it from a perspective of value blindness, do you have any process in there for challenging your own value blindness, or looking at it from a different perspective of maybe we're not seeing this? I mean, one example I always have is when I started working with female entrepreneurs and I started seeing investors interact with them, they would ask challenge questions or failure questions. What's your plan B? What are you going to do if this fails? How are you going to hire all these people? Versus, like, what's your next step? Like, how, when you scale this, where do you see yourself scaling? They would always ask failure questions. And I never got down to the bottom of why that happened, but it always happened. And it was enough to show a pattern that I was like, huh. But do you have any process for challenging your own value blindness? Knowing that we all have it, but do you guys do anything like that? Or is it in the nature of that tiger team of 5 people in the vetting?
It's by nature of the fact that it's multiple perspectives,
mm-hmm.
and that we're always refining our process.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you how many different versions of our due diligence outline we have made over the past 10 years. Like, how after a document you write final, like, we have that. Like, it's ridiculous how many times.
Because it's always going to change.
Yeah. V23, like it's crazy how many times we just keep updating it. And we tweak it, we modify it, because with every diligence, we learn new things about ourselves and about the entrepreneurs that we're trying to go after. So we're always in a refinement mode of our process. But it really is because we have a group of 5. And yes, it's 5 LPs, but some of them are regular members of our diligence team. Like they know the process. And then there's some people who are only do it once a year or once every 2 years. So they're not as adept and attuned to things. So that combination
mm-hmm.
creates different perspectives and different ways of looking at things and different questions to be asked. And I'm sure we do have those. We are blind to certain things that we need to get better at. But
mm-hmm.
in aggregate, because it's not one-on-one,
mm-hmm.
it kind of just naturally dissipates. It's not as big of a concern because it's not one perspective only. We're 5.
Have you done anything to kind of to open up the pipeline, so to speak, of where your deal flow comes from, like in terms of programs that you reach out to, or geographic locations, or quota systems, or whatever you might have to get deals in the door that you might not normally see because you wouldn't be fishing in that pool?
The best way is we built alliances with other organizations, whether it's incubators, accelerators, universities, investors, entrepreneurs. Like those are the best ways for us to build our
mm-hmm.
pipeline,
mm-hmm.
because if we have good engagement with them, they know what fits our profile. That being said, more often than not, I'm willing to have a 30-minute call with, I won't say everybody, but a lot of the entrepreneurs that come in, because I'd rather meet them when they're too early and then have them really get into our pipeline in 6 months or a year from now. And we were actually doing the analysis just this morning that we're seeing entrepreneurs that have pitched companies 3-4 years ago come back around with their second company now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we leave the door open, and our process is one that if we meet a company, we speak with an entrepreneur, we provide the sincere feedback. And sometimes it's harsh, but it's always meant to be constructive back to the entrepreneur so they know exactly why.
Mm-hmm.
And what that's done is that the communities that we're involved in, the referral sources appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because now they know we're not just taking calls and it's just being, falling on dead ears, or intros are just going into the email. We're actually doing the work and putting in the effort to follow up and to see it through, to make sure that the companies, the entrepreneurs are doing better, that they know where our perspective is. Again, I'm not always right, my advice shouldn't always be taken, but at least I've provided and closed the loop.
One of the questions I want to ask around that is there an example where like you were on the fence, or somebody turned out to be a home run that you might not have looked at, or you were like, oh, thank God we agreed to take, thank God I took that that 30-minute meeting. You know, thank God I looked here or there. Is there a home run that you can point to, that you can think about, that you might have passed on if you hadn't been looking in the right place, or opening your mind up to looking for at different founder types?
100%. There's a bit of serendipity in a lot of the deals that come in.
Mm-hmm.
It's right place, right time for me, and to an extent for the entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
There was about 7 or 8 years ago, there was an event that I happened to be at, because you remember back pre-COVID, there were probably 100 events a week.
Yeah.
And so happened to go to one. One of my investors went to one. There was an entrepreneur presenting. I didn't think anything of it. I was like, oh, this is cool, but not for us. But our investor came up to me and he said, look, you talk to this company.
Mm-hmm.
Just, get them to send us their materials. Let's have a conversation. So I went up to the entrepreneur. It ended up that we shared a subway ride home because we were both going the same direction. We talked. I was like, this is a good guy. Mm-hmm. We ended up investing, and it's been a very solid company for us.
Cool. Just
because we saw him. Somebody else came to me. One of our investors came to me and said, hey, get this in. And then, serendipity, we had a 20, 30-minute conversation on the subway.
Yeah.
So it's definitely...
Actually, I completely flubbed the interview. And then the interviewee had to go to a meeting downtown. We ended up riding the subway together. And she re-interviewed me in a less stressful environment. And I ended up getting the job.
It happens. I mean, that's why it's so important for entrepreneurs to just put in the work and the time to just be there and show up.
Yeah. When you're looking at the kind of the value proposition besides capital you bring to the team, you talked about this advising that you provide, and can you flesh that out a little bit? Tell me a little bit more about this whole concept of the LPs being advisors and matching people up, and what do you do there? Like if I was a startup founder that you were like, we want to invest in them, and you try explain to me what the value I would get out of working with you guys.
Mm-hmm. One is flexibility. Mm-hmm. I never want to be the heavy-handed investor that says, you took our money, you have to do this. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work like that. I don't need another business to run. We've got enough going on our side. Mm-hmm. But what we have is we have a committed group of investors, again, all or most of whom have been operators, mm-hmm. And entrepreneurs in their own right. So they know the journey, and they want to get hands in where it makes sense. Okay. So at the end of our diligence process, I go to the entrepreneur and I say, hey, we're about to make an investment. Who from Soundboard's side makes sense to be the board member, the advisor, the observer, the liaison for you and your company? Because it's got to be both. I'd say 70% of the time it's a natural fit where I even know the answer before I ask it. Mm-hmm. Where they're going to say, I want A, B, or C person because the network, the experience, the way they talk to me, they just get it. Mm-hmm. And it's natural. So I say, great. They're going to be your Soundboard match for the next 18 to 24 months or until X, Y, and Z milestones are hit. Mm. Because to me, I want to take them to whatever that goal is, whether it's a Series A or Series B or profitability. Like there has to be a term for us to roll off, because it's not fair to the company for us to be indefinitely mm-hmm. that fill that role in that same capacity. Mm-hmm. So I want to leave that open to the entrepreneur that, hey, maybe in a year or two, it's time for us to step aside and somebody else to come in, or we downgrade the role. Maybe it starts as a board role and then we become an observer. But we never want to be a truly passive investor where we just hear from the entrepreneur in annual reports. So in the few instances where there hasn't been a natural connection, where there hasn't been somebody that's got that industry or network or client perspective to support the company and just have those strategic conversations from the business side of things. then I just say, hey, we just want to have a 1 hour call every 4 to 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And at the early stage, entrepreneurs are pretty open to that because they see that there's value in just talking through things.
Yeah.
And that's what we want at minimum. But really having an advisory role or observer, if not a board seat, for a year to 2 years is really the target, so that we can have an ear into the business, support, and be able to make recommendations and pull the rest of our network in. Because what we've seen most is that the entrepreneur will have some requests or questions or want insight that we can leverage either whoever's sitting on their board or the other 39 investors. And their networks can come in and support. We can make intros to clients, to vendors, help them with loans or other things. Like there's tremendous value in just communication.
Cool. Okay. Let me ask you a question. There comes a point in any sales cycle where I have bought your product and I'm like, this was pretty cool. I enjoyed the onboarding process. I'm getting value out of this. And then something happens and you're like, oh my Lord, this is amazing. I'm so glad I bought this, or I'm so glad I signed up for this. Do you see a point in your journey where they just are like, I am so glad you guys invested in us. We agreed to go with you guys, where they get that, I mean, obviously they're going to get value throughout the entire process, but is there a certain point, either anecdotally that you've heard from them or that you've seen through pattern recognition across all these different investments where they just like, oh, exactly, that's exactly what the real value that I'm getting?
It's different with each company.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I've seen that glow in their eyes, like that spark that just comes like, oh my God, this is why I have investors, not just for money.
Yeah.
Because it depends on the company and the needs of the company. Mm-hmm. So there are times when, there was a company, there is a company in our portfolio, and one of our investors went, all in. He was so excited. And for an interim period of about 6 months or to a year, he became their interim marketing support, branding and marketing. Mm-hmm. And it was natural. It wasn't anything that we pushed, but it was like he was on the phone with them every week for a couple hours, just talking about marketing and branding and things like that. So that's when the entrepreneur turned to me and was like, this was awesome.
Yeah. Like,
can I have him more hours? I said, talk to him if you want him more. That becomes a one-on-one thing. Like, I'm happy that we've got such insight too with you. But it just happens naturally. And then in other instances, it's just been when the entrepreneurs just emailed out or called me and said, I'm looking for this referral, or I'm looking for an intro here. Anybody can help me. And then there have been times within like 24 hours, one of the LPs has been able to make that intro.
You've made those calls to me, and I've been like, I don't know anybody. Like, thanks, Devin. Thanks very much. Click.
But that's what we're here. We're here to be an extension of the network.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you a question about this. Like, I mean, from a differentiation standpoint, there's consulting companies, there's services agencies, there's incubators and accelerators, and then there's hands-off investors. Where on this spectrum do you all see yourself? Because you started with the DNA of an advisory company and almost a consulting company, but you don't really seem like you have a fully structured program like an incubator would have. Where do you sit in this, and where do you guys see yourself sitting in this universe?
The reason why we don't have a fully structured program, we originally thought we should create one. But the more we got onto the investing side, the more we created a wall between the consulting side and the fund, because I never wanted to give off the perception that we were investing in companies to pay for our services. I didn't want that perception. It just wasn't something that I wanted out there. So we created this strict wall between where we didn't share clients, we didn't do things. The consulting side would work with our companies, but for free as just support on an as needed or as requested basis. And that's kind of the perspective that we've been going in. We've got great leverage and support from that advisory world and the consulting world that we can bring in. but where it's warranted as opposed to it being required each time. The only time that it's really important for us is during the diligence process. And that's when I was talking about having those assessments on the leadership styles and the work personality profiles and being able to analyze those for the whole team. That's core to us. We're not gonna, that's required across all of our portfolio companies, that we need to do that, those assessments, and we need to have that conversation and analyze it together with the entrepreneur, because that's central to who we are and what we invest in. But beyond that, it's really like, we'll make recommendations to the company. We'll be that wherever we can fit within that realm and that world. If they need a business coach, we can recommend. If it's not right for us to fill in as that, because we're also investors, we'll be flexible. And that's part of why I think we've been successful, is because we've got that mindset of the entrepreneur has to make the right decision for his or her company. I can't be dictating that for them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I like that. I like that you're kind of like your success metrics are tied to the success of the business, not necessarily to employment of any coaching staff, that it's
right.
And there's not necessarily a rigid step-by-step curriculum. It's more of a personalized curriculum as per the needs of each individual startup. I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
But not
a lot of our companies have gone through that curriculum with other accelerators or incubators.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't need to replicate that. We want to augment it.
Yeah.
So if they still need business and strategy support, of course, we have, between Richard and myself alone, we're able to do that. Talk business strategy, startup strategy, execution, plus the 40 people that are LPs. So we do have a lot of expertise and experience across that we can pull in, but it's got to be a conversation with the entrepreneur to see what they want. I don't want to preach to somebody who doesn't want to hear it. I don't want to teach somebody who doesn't want to learn. And It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. It's like I've been in that, you give the right advice to the startup and they're like, no. You're like, no, what? And then they come back 6 months later, like, yeah, so I didn't follow your advice and it was a disaster like you said it'd be. So what do I do now? I'm like, I don't know, man. I have to rethink this problem, because before you were in a good situation, now you've spent $20,000 getting Facebook likes from Malaysia. So great, thanks, good on you. You could have spent that on advertising. But anyway, I like that point that you're coming in kind of like a tiger team of like experts on the specific problem they're having, and
right.
tied to y'all's metrics of return on the fund and return on the investment. Right. So speaking of return on investment, what kind of checks do you guys write, and at what point in the founder's journey? What can a startup expect from you from a check size? Is there a range?
So the easy answer is that with this new fund, we're putting about $250,000 into each company as an initial check. Mm-hmm. And we're reserving some for follow-on. Approximate, not set in stone. Yeah. So for anybody who does reach out, could vary.
Yeah.
What stage of company? There are two ways for me to answer that question. The first is by numbers. We're trying to focus on valuations of 5 to 10 million pre-money valuations. Mm. That's been our sweet spot. We know that area well. We know that investment thesis really well. It's the seed, post-seed, pre-A, small A, whatever you want to call it, in that realm. Okay. From an execution standpoint, what we see and the metrics we want to see is it's post-concept. We're not there to invest in back-of-the-napkin ideas. Yeah. I have no problem meeting with entrepreneurs who are doing that, but with the understanding that we'll want to see you for investment purposes 6 months to a year to 18 months down the line. Yeah. When you're able to stand up and demonstrate why you're the thought leader, why your idea is the winning idea in this industry, and demonstrate some execution points. And I leave it vague because it depends on the industry and it depends on the company what that is. For some, it may be a fully fledged beta that's in customers' hands that's being used. Other areas might be an LOI. So it really depends what we would consider to be validation and an understanding of the market, but we want to be able to see that the the entrepreneur can stand up and courageously say that they're a thought leader, and back it up as to why they have the winning solution or why their first attempt failed, and now they know their client base better.
Yeah, I've done a lot of that. Failing spectacularly and then learning really well. And people are like, "You really know this client?" It's like, "Yeah, because I failed awfully at it like 4 times.
Yeah.
So I better know it. I'm still in this industry." So yeah. So question, like, so you talked about the 250 check size. Are you guys usually first in? Are you part of other bundled checks, or do you like to be the only investor? Where are you sitting in that spectrum of investment?
I never want to be the only investor in. I want to know that there are good people around the table with us.
Mm-hmm.
So usually, that seed round is usually $1 to $2 million. Mm-hmm. We're a portion of that. Mm-hmm. We could be lead, but lead is usually a thankless job. Mm-hmm. So I'll do it when it makes sense, again, for the entrepreneur and for us, mm-hmm. but I don't have the need or the ego to have to be the lead every single time.
Yeah. Cool. Makes sense.
We are often the first institutional check or one of the first institutional checks in. That is what I have found.
Yeah. I find that getting that lead investor is so hard. like can somebody, you all agree to invest, can somebody just take on the mantle of lead investor? Like, please, I need it. Yeah. So all right. So
we've also played the co-lead role a lot, where we're the ones negotiating the terms, but somebody else may be a larger check or may have the industry or may be more local to that company.
Cool.
So we're flexible because we've got a lot of years in the industry to play that co-lead role when it makes sense for the company.
Got it. I like that. That's something that I'm doing in my business is coming in and partnering where it makes sense. There's no reason to, like, from an ego perspective, say I know everything. There's people on the ground who know just more than I do, So I really like that. And
that's really the thesis that we have, which is why I bring the LPs in, is because by no means am I the smartest person in the room. Like, these are phenomenal operators and business people and leaders, people who have sold their businesses or who are leading their industries. Mm-hmm. Like, why wouldn't I bring them into due diligence and into supporting the companies? It would behoove the company to want me to do that.
Yeah. I was explaining that to somebody I just hired. She was like, "Well, what is my first 6 months look like?" And I said, "Well, you're going to find 5 people who are definitely smarter than you, and I should point out that you are smarter than me, but." That having been said, go find 5 people who are smarter than you and hire them and convince them to come work for us for no money. And she's like, "That sounds like really hard." I was like, "Yep, that's what you're going to be teaching other people to do. So you're going to be able to do it." So, but being the smartest person in the room is the scariest room to be in. I always want to be the dumbest person.
I agree.
Possible. So, when we'd had a conversation years ago about how funds are structured and how that governs how you look at a investor. So want to dig a little bit into when do you normally look, how does this investment structured usually? When are you looking for a return on your investment? Where do you guys normally get you talked about from operators, but what are they expecting? Like this latest fund, I don't know if it's not public. Obviously, we can't talk about it, but anything publicly you can talk about.
So I just want to deconstruct the question, make sure I answer what you need. Sure. So there are a couple things there. One is the concept of fund size and structure, and how that impacts the company, startup.
Yep.
And the other is and the extension of that really is to make sure that there's a fit between the investor returns, the LP returns, the fund returns, and what the entrepreneur wants to do. Exactly. Yeah. That's the overall question, or the many questions baked in there.
No, that's exactly what I'm looking for. So from a startup perspective, don't think this is something that most startup founders understand. It's this whole concept of you might be saying absolutely not, sir. And it's not because they're a bad company, not because you don't like, but when that return is going to come, it is not going to kick in the right way that needs to for this fund.
Right.
And understanding that just could save everybody a whole lot of grief. On the flip side, they might not even look at you. And then they realize, oh, wait,
Right.
this is actually a really good fit because of this perspective.
So the question that I always have with entrepreneurs early on is to talk about the goals of the company, and then if they're raising funds, how they expect the investors to get paid out. And there's no wrong answer to those questions, because it's how you as the entrepreneur want to build the company.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of entrepreneurs start thinking that they will pay investors out with profit, and that's totally fine.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a different methodology, different return structure than what is traditionally considered venture capital. So you can't come to a fund that's structured like a VC fund and expect that you're going to give them, a payout over time with profits, and then they're off the cap table.
Mm-hmm.
A VC's job is to get the company sold for as high as possible or take it IPO. Mm-hmm. We have to return multiples on our fund size. Mm-hmm. So every company that we invest in, the general rule of thumb, and there's tons written about this, the general rule of thumb is that every investment that a VC makes has to return the fund. Mm-hmm. So if it's for easy numbers, if it's a $10 million fund and the fund invests $1 million, the VC is expecting that company to return $10 million.
Not like 100 mil or a bill, but like just that 10 mil. I mean, obviously the numbers being different, but the ratio being full fund size. You found?
Yeah. Usually the investments are smaller, so it'd probably be like 200,000, 250,000 needs to return 10 million. But that's the general rule of thumb, is that every investment, so if they're looking to put money into you, you have to understand what their fund size is to understand where you would have to exit at as an entrepreneur, and then kind of back out. Well, if they're $100 million fund, and I need to return $100 million, and they own 10% of my company, I need to be, this size in order to get them that return.
Yeah. And then you need to show in your plan how you're going to get there. So if you don't have a plan to do that, there's going to be it's going to be less appetite. I think that's a really important point for startup founders to realize in the investment seeking journey, is that, you might be able to trick an investor into investing in you that it's not a good fit, but probably not, because you all do this all day long. You can see through that. But on the flip side, like, there are plenty of investors out there. So if you can shorten the field to the ones that that are really qualified for you to be talking to, and talk to somebody like you who has the fund size that they can rationally get to that valuation within the timetable that you need them to get into. Because, I mean, great, you got to that point in 2065, doesn't really help your fund.
Right.
So are these numbers and are these date point, like the time when the fund is supposed to be returned, are these publicly available, or is this something they should be asking you as they're doing due diligence with you and talking to you?
Is it publicly available? There might be some information if you Google it. Crunchbase might have some, PR announcements might have some. Sometimes it's listed on the website. So you might be able to see some, but it's just to understand like where the investor's coming from. So ultimately, if you're talking to an individual angel investor, they have a lot more flexibility on what they can invest in, because it's their money. So they can take what you're saying and say, okay, this is going into my VC pile, which is long-term asset class. This is going into my loan structure where I'm going to get paid regularly out of it, or this is they can decide which bucket it goes into, because it's their own personal capital. But when you're talking to a fund, A fund has very narrow definition of what they can invest in.
Okay.
Because they've got that somewhat mandated to their investors.
That's what they promise to LPs when they raise their fund.
It's right. It's what we promise, not only what we're going to invest in, but also from a return profile. So if I, mix and match what I'm going to do and what I'm going to invest in, it's going to mess up my returns. And then I'm not going to hit the return metrics that I want to return. And most funds want to return over 3 times their fund. So if I start going into
3 hits on their investment, to go back to your original point of every single one needs to return the fund, you need at least 3 hits. Okay.
Yeah. Which the industry, again, rule of thumb is if you invest in 10 companies, 3 are going to go sour, 3 are going to return meh, 2x, 3x, 3 are going to become zombies. They're the Walking Dead. They're lifestyle businesses that the executives are making a good life on. But so you can't, the companies aren't going to be written off, and so you don't get the tax break. But they're not doing well enough to be acquired. So literally, like from an investor's perspective, they're Walking Dead. And then one of them is going to be the big one that's going to be the 30x return that's going to make up for everything. That's the industry average. Our model is a little bit different, but we don't have to get to the nuances of that. So just understanding what kind of investor you're trying to go after and who you're talking to at that particular time is important to see if there's fit. And you never want to sell an investor on something that's not true to you, because it's going to come out eventually, and then you're going to have you and the investor are going to be in a fight. Because they're going to want to push one way, they're going to want you to exit in 5 to 7 years, and you're going to want to hold on or something like that. Like it really has to be investor and entrepreneur fit for the long run.
That's something I learned in sales, and it took me a long time to figure that was not every single person is the right person for you. And like they're going to say no eventually anyway, or it's going to be an awful relationship. So figure out whether it's going to be a good relationship, whether they're going to say yes for the right reasons, and then talk to those people and figure out how to get rid of the people who are not a good fit as quickly as possible, so you can focus on the good fits, because it's good all around. And that was real hard lesson. Again, one of those, I made many mistakes before I learned that.
We all have.
Yeah.
We all have. It's, for the entrepreneurs out there, it's really important, and I can't stress this enough. Due diligence should be a two-way street. If you are talking to an investor, talk to them and understand what their process is, who they've invested in, how they invest, and do your diligence on them. One of the things that we do, and I apologize, there's a thunderstorm going on outside if you hear that, the rumbling. One of the things that we do in our fund is that when we start diligence on a company, we're asking for a lot of confidential, proprietary information. We're having conversation with clients. So I immediately send the entrepreneur our contact list of all the entrepreneurs that we've invested in. Sort of this open kimono approach to say, hey, I'm digging into you. You're welcome to do the same to us. And I don't know how many entrepreneurs actually do reach out, but just the fact that I'm extending that, I think, means a lot to the entrepreneurs, so they know that we're in this for the long run. This is a long-term asset class, and the joke is that it's harder in the U.S. It's harder to get out of an early-stage investment than it is out of a marriage. So we really have to make sure that everything we do is in line, so that when the entrepreneur calls up at 7 o'clock on a Friday with bad news, because 9 times out of 10 it's going to not be great news, that we're still they're not going to call us for great news on a Friday at 7 o'clock. They'll email us or send it or tell us the next day. But when they do call, you want to look at the phone and be like, okay, this is clearly important. Not, oh man, I got to deal with this right now. You don't want that to happen on either side. You don't want to feel like that when the investor calls and you see that name pop up on your screen. And as an investor, we don't want to do that with the entrepreneur. So that creating that relationship and that bond early on is immensely important, and making sure that there's fit. That was my rant. I apologize, Devin.
That was your what?
That's my rant.
That's your rant. No,
due diligence and process.
So we're gonna have to edit this out. Ashley, edit this piece out right after he said his rant where I act surprised. No, I thought that was like, honestly, that's what I'm trying to get out of you, because when you get on that roll and you just start talking to a certain degree stream of consciousness, like all this elegance and just real wisdom comes out in a way that's really approachable and really like, it's why you're one of my trusted advisors, because
I
of
love
those
you, man.
types of rants. So no, but in all seriousness, I'm not, not blowing smoke here. Like that rant is like, so the more we'll talk about after the recording. So I just need to edit out the entire thing. All right. And action. That's really interesting. When you're looking at these startups and you're looking for that fit, and they're doing the due diligence with you and the diligence, we talked a little bit about the stage and the metrics and the team. How do they get in? I don't know whether that was. All right, let's edit that out.
Sorry,
that was
the crap out of me.
entirely too dramatic. That was entirely dramatic. Where do you look for them? They call me my castle.
I was so intently focused on you that suddenly it went boom. Okay.
All right. And all right, so I'm gonna ask about where do you find the teams? How can they get in front of you?
Okay.
So you talked a lot about you going to different locations and being in different areas. So these teams that are going to be thoughtful enough to do this qualification with you, to dig into the due diligence of you while you're digging into the due diligence of them. Where do you find them? How do these people get in front of you? Do they just send you an email? Are they going to DM you? Are they going to slide into your DMs on Twitter? How do they get in front of you?
So the best way is always a referral, because those emails get responded to more often. We do look at cold deal flow. We do look at the deal flow that comes in on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever else. But again, there's always too many emails. So I can't guarantee that we're going to respond to every email, but it does get seen. So and I'll say most entrepreneurs are able to find 1 degree of connection away, and we're pretty approachable, or we try to be at least. If anybody finds us as not approachable, please DM me right away or send me a message right away, like, hey, you're not approachable, and we'll fix that. But there should be avenues that you can get to us through our network. If not, you can certainly just send something cold. But again, cold gets seen, but there's just so much deal flow coming in constantly. It doesn't always get responded to.
Cool. So let me ask this in a slightly different way. It's just, if I'm running an ecosystem, I asked this on an investor call, and I was asking them, because I serve underserved communities. So I might be doing a program in Aruba, or in South Texas, or in the Yucatan, and I was like, how do I get investor interest? And this guy's like, just get a unicorn. I'm like, well, yeah, great. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the most obvious answer ever spoken by an investor. But like, how does somebody who's starting up an ecosystem in Pittsburgh, how did Pittsburgh get your interest? How does Ohio get your interest? Like, how does an ecosystem get in front of you, or a program get in front of you to get you to come for that serendipitous event participation?
So I can speak for me. I can't speak for all other investors.
Yeah.
But for me, it's just, reaching out, telling me that there's ecosystem of entrepreneurs, and you want to stay connected. I'm happy to set regular calls with these influencers or these other investors or accelerators, or do demo days or office hours. Like that's the way we build the best deal flow and the best deal sources, just by being active. But for more national and broader attention, it's to remind the entrepreneurs that had a foothold in that ecosystem, or that came out of it, whether they went to high school or university or started their company there, just reminding them to come back and mentor and talk to the other entrepreneurs. And when they're out there in the startup world, they say, hey, I grew up in Pittsburgh or Ohio or wherever it is. And just keep that top of mind, and that will naturally bring recognition to that ecosystem. It was about 7 or 8 years ago that I saw this very prolific angel investor from Hawaii. She was speaking, and somebody asked, like, "You're in Hawaii. How many Hawaiian entrepreneurs are there?" And she said, "They all leave to go to San Francisco." And somebody else, like, why do they leave? Why don't you push them to stay? She's like, I encourage them to go because they can't stay. They need to go to the valley. They need to go to where they can have better success. They need to, grow up in a sense. But when they go, I tell them, when you make it big or when you get there, remind them where you came from, and then come back and talk to the high school students, talk to the university kids, and tell them that you were able to do this, because that's going to encourage more entrepreneurship, which will make it more organic to come up, and then more resources will be committed.
Yeah.
So it does come from the entrepreneurs, but they've got to make that commitment to talking about the fact of where they came from.
Yeah. Yeah. We just had an IPO here of Bumble. And it's like all of a sudden all the investors are like, ooh. And I'm like, dude, that was an excellent startup founder. She worked at an excellent startup. She left and formed another excellent startup. Obviously it's the founder, and but they're like, well, let's find another her. And I'm like, they're all here. Great. I mean, I'll take any excuse for you to come down, but now they're all looking for dating apps. And I'm like,
right.
No, man, no. Like it's a complete, there's other stuff to look at. And it's like, it's just always an interesting conversation to have with investors. Let me ask you a question, because you really talked a lot, and I think you made a really good case for how important your LPs and your team as team members of your startups is. Can you tell me a little bit more about who are they and why they're an unfair advantage? You talked a little bit about the operators. Can you give a background as to like where you really shine in operators, or is it just all across the board?
So from our investor base?
Yeah, well, I mean, if your team, like you would mention that your team, you will put LPs on the board and they'll be connected with them to solve specific problems and all that. So obviously you're not going to tell me who the LPs are. I mean, if you want to, I'll write them all down with their phone numbers. But I mean, like in terms of their, in terms of like, so if I'm looking to get, I've fit all your criteria and you're looking to invest me, and I'm trying to decide, what does that team look like that they can expect? So for the startups out there, why is your team amazing that they should be talking to you?
So we come from all different backgrounds. It's not a one industry fund. It's not all tech entrepreneurs. We have, again, people who have started and sold their businesses, people that have taken over businesses, people who have had private equity involved. We've had exits, roll-ups, like everything that was possible between our investor base we've seen, including professionals who are at the peak of their careers, that they've been, they launched a business 20, 30 years ago. They've seen everything there is to see in their industry. So the day-to-day of it is almost memorized. The challenges of that don't surprise them anymore. So now they want to go back to their humble beginnings and work with startups again. So we have that bench from the experience side, but there are a few of us on the GP team and between my partner and I who know venture really well. And it's a blend of bringing those two perspectives into the conversation, knowing the business strategy and operation and execution with the venture returns, how to build a venture scalable company that really makes us that much different, because it's not all in one person's head or in two people. It's bringing the combined efforts from two different groups of people.
Yeah. I like that. I don't think I've ever heard you talk about the combination of the venture expertise with the industry or discipline expertise together. I really like that.
Thanks. I never had to think about it this way.
That's my job, sir.
I know. I give you credit.
But no, that's really cool. That's really cool. Can we talk a little bit about diversity in your LPs and in your GP? Are you seeking out, how diverse are you guys from a gender, from a ethnicity perspective, from a background perspective, and are you doing anything to consciously or actively diversify the different LPs and the different members of your team, whether they're LP or GP?
There's not enough diversity. There needs to be more. I am actively trying to reach out to the women in our fund to introduce us and to help promote us among their networks, because that's the easiest way that we've seen.
Yeah.
But it's not. It hasn't been easy. And I think as an industry, we've seen that challenge, and there are a lot of different theories on it. But I'm hopeful that our process and our framework, which is much more inclusive of different, which is much more inclusive of different perspectives, and which encourages people to participate so that they can learn the process of being a venture capitalist or an angel investor, and not feel like they have to do the whole lone wolf strategy as an angel. I'm hopeful that this is better suited towards introducing people to startup investing as a whole, and therefore we can bring more diverse people in who this would be the first foray for them. So I've been trying to create the systems and processes so that it's more approachable and engaging, and now we're going about it to try to bring in more LPs and GPs into the pipeline.
Cool. Perfect. Thank you. So now we're going to get into the fun part of the conversation. I mean, I know the whole thing was incredibly fun.
It was fun. I enjoyed this.
But I want to talk a little bit about some resources for our listeners. Like, what book or podcast or newsletter would you suggest founders should be reading or subscribing to that would just it will really give them alpha on their invested time?
One of my favorite podcasts is the Acquired podcast. I actually, I haven't listened to it this past season, but I at one point I went back and I started from season 1 and just ran through all of them. It was really awesome just to listen and hear the journey of all the companies that they thought about, especially in the early years before Acquired got really big. And just the thought process of the two. I forgot who the two guys who run it, but just they're just genuine and thought process, the way they talked about it, and they would have the same questions that you and I would have, and they would talk about it in a very having a beer with one another way. So it was good to get that insight, and they did a lot of research.
Cool.
So that's probably the number one.
I'm definitely checking that out. That is not on my podcast list, and I am definitely.
Oh my God! You gotta listen. Yeah,
subscribing immediately. I'm going to stop subscribing to all the true crime podcasts, which I have to do. True crime. So when we're in the car together, I'm like, "Can we listen to the Startup?" No. I'm like, "How about true crime?" Yeah. I'm like, "Okay." Not going to fight with their true crime. It is so, but I'll put Acquired on there. What about from an investor perspective? When you're if somebody's breaking into an investment, or just one of these in a blog or a podcast or a newsletter that you're like, that just really helps. I really love this resource that you can suggest to new investors coming into the industry.
Samir Kaji is an amazing, brilliant thought leader in the industry. He's had probably close to over a decade, maybe even 2 decades worth of working with and being a thought leader on micro VCN. He has a podcast called Venture Unlocked. And that is my latest podcast that I've started from the beginning, and I'm just making my way through. Just amazing content consistently.
Cool.
And Colin West, I got to look this one up. He's got a good blog as well. I apologize. Ensemble.vc. I think he's got a newsletter that goes out that's pretty solid.
Cool. Well, I will. I'm incredibly embarrassed to say that I don't have any of those on my reading list or my podcast list, and I'm like, I was hoping to be able to be like, I love them. I listen to them all the time. I'm like, no, it's really awkward. I will definitely be listening. That's cool. Digging into the crates there. What do you?
I'm looking for one more thing. I think it's the Axiom newsletter. Is that what it's called? Axiom. Axios. AXIOS. That's a daily newsletter that Dan Premack used to have it, and then he stopped for a while, and now it's rebranded under AXIOS. That's a great one that just recaps private equity and VC deals every day.
Oh, cool. Cool. All right. So a little bit longer form. What book are you reading right now for fun?
For fun? My son and I just read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and now we're reading the second one. Yeah.
Excellent book. I love that book. I absolutely. Roald Dahl is a unsung hero of young adult fiction. You should read them, all of them. They're like James and the Giant Peach. They're kind of dark. Like, you're gonna have to have some conversations with them, but like they're really books. Really like kind of those eye-opening books you read as a youth that you're just like, the world is a little bit bigger than I expected it to be. You know, they're really good.
And reading it as an adult, you're like, this is what I read as a kid.
Yeah. You're like,
this was
wait a second. Why are there 7 people in a bed? Like, you know.
Why? Like, they're smoking. Like, what are they smoking? And then, but the second one, the Great Glass Elevator, that is a trippy book.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, they're in this factory with the Oompa Loompas, and then they blast off into space.
Yeah.
Like,
he gets trippier. James and the Giant Peach is a trippy book. You're like, what? Yeah. Well, what about for business? Are you reading anything? I mean, I'm assuming you're not reading them yourself. Maybe you're getting them started early, but are there any business books that you're like digging into now?
Don't joke. When he was just born, his bedtime stories were like company updates that were emailed to me. Because I'm like, I'm not going to get a chance to read this otherwise. So you get to listen, and sometimes it put him to sleep, sometimes it didn't.
The real question for our listeners is, did you make your son sign an NDA?
Touche. That's a good one. Devin. Good. But the business book that I've been reading is actually written by one of our LPs, Amy Radin. She wrote a book called The Changemaker's Playbook.
Ooh.
And I should actually get you a copy of that, Devin.
Yes, you should. I love gifts.
Yeah.
But no, I love the whole concept of change makers as just as an active thing you're trying to create or trying to be. I really love that concept. I heard it at a Ashoka conference. They have this whole thing where they teach universities to be change makers, and I was just like, ooh. And I love that. I would definitely say, Amy, what is her name? Amy?
Amy, Radin.
Radin, Radin.
Yeah, I can send you any of these links afterwards, or the newsletter.
Yeah. We'll put them all in the description.
Okay.
Okay. So, who are 3 people that you know that I should interview, or for selfish gains that I should interview, that you'd introduce me to, that I should interview them in the ecosystem, investors or startups? But on the flip side, that the listener, the community should know, that they should be following, or they should be checking out, that you'd like to give a plug to?
So I originally thought this was like aspirational. Like Mike Maples is an investor who is phenomenal. I've heard him speak live once, and then on a bunch of other recorded mediums. He's awesome. Like the way he speaks and what he talks about. Floodgate Ventures. He's top notch. So is Samir and Kaji and Colin West. But from an entrepreneur perspective, there are two that are just awesome people and have really good journeys. One is Sam Miller from Proteus Motion. He's been a hustler. We've been following him since he was early on in his concept and have invested a couple times throughout his journey. And he just came out with a monster round. Proteus is you'll geek out on this, Devin. It's a device. Think of it as a piece of exercise equipment that uses magnets to give 3D resistance. So if you think about like the case example is
for working out, right?
Yeah,
it's cool. That is, yes, you're
unbelievably
absolutely right.
cool.
I will geek out on that.
I know.
I have to interview this person. This is the coolest thing I've ever heard. And I'm probably buying one, and my wife is going to be like, "You still have?"
No, you can. It's only for high-end sports facilities, man. I wish we could all afford one. He's working on the consumer model.
Yeah, I had the same problem with Smallhold when I was at your investor meeting, and I met Smallhold, and I'm like, "I want one of these for my house." He's like, "We don't sell them to houses," and now they do. I bought one, and I bought one for like 3 of my friends during the pandemic. So
good job. It was an amazing gift.
Yeah. I give you the gift of mushrooms. Yeah.
The edible kind, guys, not the psychedelic kind.
Yes. The legal kind. The legal kind.
The ones you have for dinner. But Proteus, it's like if you're throwing a baseball, this is their case example. When you start back, you're pulling and then you're pushing. But actually, unless you're using a physical, like a ball, it's not. You can't get that same resistance all throughout because the weights are they're one directional.
Yeah. So you have to.
They've developed this
separately. Yeah.
Exactly. So he's developed a device, leveraging technology that his father actually developed decades ago at MIT, that now has 3D resistance. It's awesome.
That is really cool because you could use that for any sport. Every sport has a compound exercises that they need to do. My dad just had a scare, and like our big mission was to get him up to speed enough so he could go play tennis. Because as soon as he got on the tennis court, he would be doing those compound exercises, and then everything takes off from there. I love that true because you're going to also learn the muscle memory of the activity as opposed to learning this, and then trying to put that together in your head with a pitch, which like this exercise is pitching, this exercise is pitching,
I'll send you their link, and they're very active on Instagram too.
Cool.
It's really cool.
You mentioned 2. Is there another one that you were?
Charge It Spot down in Philadelphia. And I joke with him that this is the most brilliant no-duh idea when I heard it.
Yeah.
It was just awesome. And I love Doug because he's an amazing hustler, a very creative marketer, and has been able to work his way into some of the top brands in the US.
Cool. And
the concept is simple.
Yeah.
There's a phone charging kiosk, which we've all seen before. But what his innovation is, he charges the retailers instead of the end user. So if it's sitting in Target is one of their clients, if it's sitting in Target, he's charging Target for that unit being there, so that it's a free service for us as shoppers inside of Target. So we can charge our phones while we're there.
Okay, in a secure way. I mean, it locks okay, cool.
And through COVID, he's done amazing through COVID, even though most of his clients were closed.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was like, how did he survive? There's so many great startups that were not set up for the remote, and it's like, but he's done well because of his tenacity, his creativity, his ability to think through problems. Yeah.
And I had a conversation with him at one point, and I'm like, hey, what happened? Like, did you lose any clients? He's like, we lost one. I'm like, oh, come on, you were so close.
Yeah.
You know, he's like, Jonathan, they went bankrupt. Like, what do you want me to do?
Like, I can't really control bankruptcy law. Like, okay, fair enough.
I was like, all right, you get a pass.
Yeah.
But just a phenomenal entrepreneur, and what he's been able to accomplish when his clients were closed, he still was able to support them and work with them so that he was there. Again, empathy.
Yeah.
And talking to them and building that process. And now he's added phone sanitization and a whole slew of other things to it. So now he's further entrenched into the companies.
Cool. All right, so let's pivot and let's talk a little bit about ecosystems. Are there any ecosystem plays or any programs that you've come into contact with in Philly, Ohio, New York, any of the areas that you're in that you're just like, nobody knows about these people, but you really should? If you're a startup, go to them. If you're an investor, go look at them for deal flow. If you're a mentor or facilitator, go help them out because they're doing great work.
So my first plug is for the Kaufman Fellows program.
Mm-hmm.
And this is for, it's mainly for the venture capitalists and investors, but they've expanded the program to be broader than that. So as entrepreneurs, if you see somebody that's in the Kaufman network, as LPs, if you see someone in the Kaufman network, they've been super vetted to be part of a very small cohort of people who have a deep network, deep understanding of how venture works, and a dedication to be accretive in value, and want to be long-term advocates for startups and entrepreneurs and in the industry in general. So it's often branding, give them an extra few minutes of attention.
Yeah, cool.
That's the
really
first one
good
that kind of spans all sides.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's something that a startup might not even recognize to look for. And I think that's great. On that due diligence, you see that Kaufman logo. Ooh, take a second look. You know, that's cool.
Yeah. It's been a great program, and I give a lot of credit to whatever methodology they do to vet us out is solid, because everybody I meet is just somebody I'm like, I want to work on a deal with this person. I want to, be colleagues with this person. Like, there's inherent trust.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
The other two that I think are underrated, one is the Zahn Center in Harlem, which you know well, Devin. The first time I went there, it was very funny because I'm walking into the university, and back then they hadn't really built it out. Mm-hmm. So I go, the security guard says, yeah, go down those steps over there into the basement. And so I'm like, okay. So like, there's like signs that just say Zahn Center with an arrow this way. And as I'm going further and further deeper into the basement of this dilapidated building in Harlem, like it's like the lights were flickering, a door opens and closes on its own. Yeah. It's like leave, a mouse scurries across the floor. Like this is a horror movie to start. And then all of a sudden, I open this door and it's like it's like heaven right there. There's this amazing machinery. Like, it was awesome, but nobody knows about up there.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that I preach, but at the same time, I'm a little protective of, because I'm like, this is one of the things that I know about that most people don't. But I want to give them a plug because they're pretty awesome. And then finally, sorry, go ahead.
No. Say, yeah, absolutely. I think that's the real point of these is if you're not slightly uncomfortable about giving out this resource, then, it shouldn't, if everyone's like, oh, everyone knows about that, like, let's plug Techstars, please, because nobody knows about Techstars. I mean, it's like some of these programs, they get all the publicity, but some of these programs are really working their butt off with very little resources and they're really doing, great work and helping people to understand that they're there and that they are doing great work. And, walk past that dimly lit hallway and go to the other side so you can see that greatness that's there is really worth it. And they're in every city, This is a great one that fair transparency, I used to work for. So that's actually how I know Jonathan. But it's
if anybody knows those networks and knows those incubator programs that are down that long dingy hallway, let me know.
Yeah.
Because those are the areas that I'm trying to get in touch with that most people don't know about, that most people aren't catering to, because I can't guarantee that we're going to invest in anything, but I want to meet those entrepreneurs and those hustlers that are coming out.
Yeah. Really good point. Very good point. Yeah. I always said, I want that hallway there, because I want investors to see what these kids have to put up with to get this resource, and what they're willing to walk through that hallway in order to get to the promised land. So if they're willing to walk through that hallway, what else are they willing to walk through? How much harder are they willing to work? It's not a beautiful shiny object on that is just obvious because billions of dollars have been pumped into it. This is a life a lot of entrepreneurs are actually leading. It's in the back room of a small business center. It's in a community center. It's in a community college. It's in so.
For what it's worth, you and the rest of the Zon team have done amazing, and the facilities have been upgraded. Like, it looks a lot better to all your listeners out there.
Oh, yes.
It's
we should
amazing
point
right
that
now,
out.
but I'm talking about like
no longer
8 years ago when it started.
Yeah. A whole bunch of people were like, I'm not going. You're not selling me on that. Like, no, it looks much nicer now. Looks much nicer.
It's come a long way, and it's amazing what they've done over the past 7 or 8 years since it launched. Yeah. And so you remind me of the other two. One is Founder Institute, which for those people who want to test out an idea, who are just starting, they're still in concept stage, that's the first thing I send them to, because it helps vet the idea internally for yourself. And if you're accepted into the program, it gets you to the next level of success. That whatever that milestone is, whether it's a pitch deck, it's to go full time, it's to make it a hobby, whatever that is, it helps through that process and that journey.
And they're global, right? They've got offices like all over the place. Yeah,
they're huge. Yeah,
I remember looking at their website and I was like, wow, okay, there's a lot more, and there's a lot of different. And I know a bunch of different people who I think you might have introduced me to them, and that's how I know them. So I shouldn't name drop because you'd be like, Devin, I introduced you. But
fine, you can.
But like, I remember there's some guy who was a managing director there that, but like just really smart people, really good, smart people that are doing excellent work, because there's a lot of programs where you're just like, so you're teaching startups, huh? And you're just like, wow, okay. And like, this is not that. The Founder Institute is just some excellent people teaching excellent stuff. So
and then for the listeners that are based in the U.S., every state has some economic development arm that's looking towards innovation. So some states are better than others. Like Pennsylvania's got one of the best that I've seen. They're really trying to invest in companies in their state, and their thing is they want job growth, and job growth creates tax dollars, is beneficial in the long run. They also want the returns, but that's their key. One of their key metrics is job growth and companies that stay there. So if you're located in the U.S., reach out to your local EDAs, see what support they can give you, because a lot of them do have resources, funding, and other programs that they can support you on.
Cool. Well, Jonathon, as always, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for giving myself and all the listeners so much time. Thank you, and we'll be in contact soon.
You got it. Thanks, Devin. I appreciate the time. It's been fun.
Have a good one.
Juntobot is a company that focuses on supporting and promoting entrepreneurs regardless of their industry, background, or entrepreneurial phase. We offer e-learning programs to teach skills and prepare future startup founders for the real world. We also host a networking platform where we connect people and entrepreneurs from different industries and communities. Finally, we facilitate an apprentice program where we train individuals and employees in different areas such as marketing. Our goal is to make the world 5% better by enabling entrepreneurs to create businesses for positive impact.